Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome. We are going to be spending about an hour talking about the journey that one of the leading hydrocarbon producers, Cepsa, is undertaking to become a much more sustainable and a leader in green and sustainable energy. And we're also going to talk about how the cloud, and specifically the AWS cloud, is helping them enable and accelerate that transformation. And I forgot the clicker.
I have it.
Thank you. So my name is Joseph Santamaria. I'm the Director for Solution Architecture and Customer Success within the AWS for Energy Group. And I have the tremendous pleasure and honor to be joined here on stage today by Carmen de Pablo.
Thank you, Joseph. And for everyone, I'm Carmen de Pablo. I'm Cepsa CFO, also Head of Strategy, Sustainability, M&A, and IT. And it's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to be here today for AWS to invite us for this session, and thank you all for coming.
Okay, so the agenda will start with talking a little bit at high level about what's going on with with the energy transition and how is the cloud supporting that, and then we'll just Carmen will dive into what's going on at Cepsa, how are they taking on their energy transition. We will kind of team tag a little bit on the journey that Cepsa's had over the last few years around AWS. We'll give you some specific examples, and then we'll switch and talk about switching from talking about what we've already done or what we're doing, and talk about what we're going to be doing next. So clearly, one of the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century is the energy transition. We're probably keenly aware of that. But what does that mean, right? One is we have to diversify our energy sources. The Wall Street Journal announced a couple of days of put an article out that 80% of energy generation investments are now on renewable sources, which is great. For the next few decades, we're going to need an all-of-the-above strategy for energy. But over time, probably the second half of the century, we should be able to get into majority of the energy sources being clean. The forecast right now is about a third of them will be renewable energy sources by 2050. We also need to increase electrification. We know that electricity is a very safe and effective way to transmit and to move energy and electrons around. But we need to make sure that the grid is ready for the energy systems of the future. We need to keep investing in a more resilient and reliable electric grid. That's not enough. We need to continue investing in decarbonization and other solutions, whether that's carbon sequestration, removing carbon from the atmosphere through direct air capture, or carbon capture and sequestration, lower carbon solutions like low carbon concrete or sustainable fuels. We're going to need to continue investing. Expected that this year there'll be $1.7 trillion invested in these type of technologies. And what we also need to do is meet customers where they're going to be. I mean, we're seeing customers more and more interested in renewables. For instance, 55% of millennials are interested in time-of-day rates, which means that they are willing to change behavior. They're interested in how they can contribute to decarbonization and to a more sustainable future. We at Amazon are fully committed to this transition, and we're committed to it, one, as a consumer. We are already the largest corporate buyer of renewable power. We have a commitment to have 100,000 electric vehicles delivering packages. We have over 10,000 of them already deployed in the US and Europe. And we're building more and more data centers with solutions like low carbon steel and low carbon concrete. Beyond being a consumer, we're also an innovator in this space. We're building solutions. We're introducing solutions like Graviton4, which we announced yesterday. Beyond that, how we run our data centers, we're constantly innovating to make them more efficient and effective, so that our carbon footprint can be, keep going down consistently. And we also, within the AWS for Energy, we host a cohort every year. We call it the Clean Energy Accelerators. This is the third year we're doing it. We support about 10 to 15, this year it's 15 startups, and we give them advice. We bring them to market to those companies that we select, that they're doing really innovative work in sustainability. And then last, as an investor, Amazon is fully committed. We created the Climate Pledge Fund, which is a $2 billion investment fund. We've already funded over 20 startups, and we'll continue to do that for those that can help us, focus and accelerate a transition to a low carbon economy. So it is clear, I think it's very clear to us and to more and more of our customers that the energy transition is going to require a scale, agility, and speed that only the cloud can provide. So we're working with companies, obviously like Cepsa, but others to get data from new sources, whether it's emissions in refineries, fuel cells, or instrumenting wind parks and solar panels. We have over tens of thousands of windmills that are being, wind turbines that are being supported in AWS, and millions of solar panels. Some of our customers are ingesting 2 million data points a second. All that data needs to be processed, and you're going to need new solutions for AI/ML and to get new insights and really be able to identify opportunities to reduce waste and accelerate the transition. And we're also working with customers on high performance computing, whether it be to accelerate the time to perform functions like seismic processing or design better wind farms, or just in general predict the impact of weather on electric grid and make it more reliable and resistant. That's what we do at AWS for Energy. AWS for Energy is a group of about 400 professionals with an average of 17 years of experience in the industry. And we live in the, we have a broad range of professionals from geoscientists to former transmission operators. And we work with all our customers, 7,000 plus energy customers that we have at AWS. And we help them, we live at the intersection of industry and technology. So we help them adopt the 300 plus services that AWS has to offer. But also not only I'm going to call it standard services, but we also build solutions and accelerators that are tailored and targeted for energy. And we do that with, we have over 200 of them at this point. And we do that not by ourselves, we do it with partners. We have over 100,000 partners that have solutions that are applicable and to energy companies. And we're doing this with a number of customers. You can see here, we're helping them be more resilient, more reliable, more renewable, more resourceful. And one of these leaders that we're working with is Cepsa. And Carmen? Yep. Love to hear your
Thank you very much, Joseph. And so we have learned about AWS energy practice and who is Cepsa. For those of you that may not know us so well, effectively we are a leading privately held company based in Spain, looking effectively at the broad range of products in the energy space, from basically upstream to chemicals to our energy business, which are refineries. Two of the largest in Spain are part of our portfolio, which we call today energy parks. And we have almost 100 years of history and currently have presence in 18 countries in 5 continents. So our presence is quite global. Just to give you a sense of size, we have effectively 31 billion of revenues last year in euros, almost 3 billion of EBITDA, and over 10,000 employees. And that gives you a framework of what is Cepsa today. As mentioned, largest, second largest refiner in Portugal and Spain, with two well-located energy parks, as we call it, at ports that allow us, to basically be one of the key leaders in bunkering and also aviation fuel for our customers. And also, we're number 1 in lab in our chemicals business, and also number 2 in phenol worldwide. And these are obviously products that are in our day-to-day life in terms of basically plastics and hydroalcoholics and so forth. We are using it, and they're coming. Most of them will have some part of Cepsa's products. So we also have a retail network, and that's important because we have over 2,000 stations around our Iberia Peninsula, and that's an area where we are looking also to make the energy transition and to move forward. And now, basically, in terms of what it is, our position and our different businesses, as mentioned, we have a diversified energy ecosystem, with an upstream position, which actually, as we're moving and transitioning into effectively more sustainable businesses, we just recently sold out our position in UAE, and that's really a showcase of how we're taking the steps forward to move out of fossil fuel, hydrocarbons, into green molecules and sustainable products. Our energy parks, as mentioned, really strategically located, and we have now agreements where we will be exporting part of the products that we will produce more sustainable into the port of Rotterdam and Northern Europe, where there is a need to have cheap, sustainable energy. And as mentioned, chemicals and commercial and clean energies, also in the context of our portfolio, bring alongside with mobility, the breadth and depth of our operations and activities. So we're taking, a leading role in taking the step forward into energy transition. We are very serious about climate change and the need to change and the need to decarbonize. And as an example, as I mentioned, the sell down of our position in UAE in the upstream is really a clear step forward. Now, sustainability is at the core of what we do. And we have a strong commitment in ESG, which is really across everything that we do in-house, from comprehensive and rigorous policies, and that we take into also our decision-making when we take investments, when we look at opportunities. We basically get ESG across the board. So it's part of our DNA. It is obviously one that, as you can see, is being recognized, the actions that we're taking by third-party ESG rating agencies. And we're very proud, and just to give you the context, that we're number one, basically just been announced by S&P, CSA ranking, also by Sustainalytics and Clarity AI. All those three firms ranked us number one, top in the sector of our list. And we're top three, and number 3 and 3% with Moody's and EcoVadis. But this, is a recognition of the steps that we're taking as a company as we look into decarbonizing, as we look to invest more in sustainable projects. Right now, today, 40% of our investments are fully dedicated to sustainable investments. And it is, as I mentioned, across our culture. These are just recognitions, but our board, in the investment decisions that we take, in our executive committee, and how we bring also our employees to embrace, transition and taking action. And what it is our sustainability plan, because that's where effectively now we work together into bringing the energy transition to accelerate. So let's get a starting point, which is, for us at Cepsa, we have been measuring emissions since 2005. So this is a long journey. This is not something that is new because it's in fashion. This is really, I believe, that the company had for many years. And we have audited also our emissions under ISO standard for over a decade. So this is clearly, important. And what is not measured, it cannot be, followed, and it doesn't exist. So we need to have the data in order to effectively get us to see what is the pathway, what is the evolution that we're making through basically our businesses. Obviously, we have targets in terms of our decarbonization plan on all three scopes, and as many of you know, on scope 1, this is directly on our industrial processes, effectively from combustion of our furnaces and processes and flares. Scope 2, it is relating to the imported energy and associated product energy that effectively is we are purchasing from third parties. And scope 3, which is the most difficult, all the indirect greenhouse emissions that we need to effectively, within the value chain, need to account for. And we're targeting to reduce, the numbers that you see here, as reference. So now, we have some challenge to basically deliver on the commitments that we have, because we need to work very hard for an energy company like ourselves to make the transition is really changing and turning the way that we're doing business. We need to decarbonize our own operations and those of our clients. In terms of our targets, and you can see here, we have a 55% target reduction of emissions, basically when we look at that starting point that I showed you earlier of 2019, for a target of basically becoming effectively net zero by 2050 and 55% reduction by 2030. And in scope 3 as well, effectively we are looking to reduce between 15 to 20% in carbon intensity of sold products by 2030 as well. In also achieving net zero, which is our objective and our goal. We also have other areas of effectively target and ambition, which are maybe not so well entrenched in the industry, but water, which is not really spoken about, is one of the critical areas. And for us, we have already a commitment to reduce our consumption by 20% by 2025 in terms of fresh water consumption, and we are in the stressed hydric areas. And also diversity is important, with a 30% target and objective that we have to have women in management positions, and we are very close to achieving that. But I think the important thing is, if you look at our website, if you have read a little bit about us, last year we effectively announced and published our positive motion strategy, an important step because this was the recognition that we as an energy company have a path and are looking to decarbonize and take our business forward as a leading into the energy transition. And this effectively has created a new ecosystem in the energy for us, where we have effectively two customer-centric businesses, one relating to mobility and new commerce, as you can see on the slide, and the other in terms of sustainable energy, where we are looking to offer decarbonization solutions in an integrated way, getting green electrons that effectively we convert into green molecules to serve our clients, to decarbonize our own operations and decarbonize those of our clients. To be really the leading company in Europe, we have today the largest green hydrogen project on the works in terms of European context. And that's really a step forward that we're taking and that we announced in the context of our positive motion strategy. And as mentioned, we have obviously the challenge to not only decarbonize our own operations, but those of our clients. And how do we take the steps on our side? Well, reducing consumption of fossil fuel, that's clearly an area. We will go into electrification, also reducing the overall consumption that we have of certain products and using and applying energy efficiencies across the board. And but more importantly for us, we are taking steps and actions to take that route into decarbonizing our own activities. But the important thing here is also to decarbonize our clients. Industry and energy represent 80% of the CO2 emissions. And out of that, more than half you cannot electrify, because there's been a lot of talk around green electrons, and obviously we need to invest. We need to obviously bring more windmills and solar panels to bring those green electrons into the different businesses. But there is industries, heavy industries, transport, and in terms of aviation, maritime, and commercial road transport, some of these businesses cannot be electrified. There is no solution. The solution comes from effectively generating green molecules and already bringing effectively sustainable fuel to those businesses. And that's effectively the game that us as a company in the energy space need to take forward and need to lead. If we look at effectively how we are turning and shifting, and it's not easy because effectively a transformation is hard. You need to take the steps. You need to change the way that you're doing things. You need to effectively convert into something else. But I think here Cepsa has really a privileged position from the perspective that on one side we're not publicly quoted, but we have a strong commitment from our shareholders, and that allow us to be maybe sometimes more brave and take further steps from other companies that are in the public domain and obviously have to have the short-term institutional and investor effectively scrutiny, which some of these decisions are taking alongside and effectively more burden to the company as we transition. But here are some of the key areas for us of focus where we are converting our business. Both in the mobility side, as mentioned, we are looking effectively to get chargers across all our service stations, ultra-fast charging every 200 kilometers, and also with hydrogen every 300, and converting our service stations in ultra convenience and food destinations. At the end of the day, the customer and its valuable time will be with us for at least 15 to 30 minutes, which is very different to the current proposition that we have in service stations as they stand today. And then, sustainable energy, this is really the core, really the heart of what we're doing as a company. As I mentioned, we decarbonize our own hydrogen consumption. We already are producers of hydrogen, it's gray hydrogen, and obviously we have the expertise to take effectively now, hydrogen into green molecules and all its derivatives, green ammonia and methanol. And we have an ambition to basically build up to 2 gigawatts of hydrogen, green hydrogen production capacity, 2.5 in biofuels, million tons, and be the leader in SAF, this is sustainable aviation fuel, with effectively 0.8 million tons per year by 2030. And in terms of renewables, because we will not convert ourselves into a utility, but we will cater for those green electrons by developing our own portfolio on solar PV, where we have already over 1 gigawatt of ready-to-build projects. Energy parks, which is really essential on what we do, and the strategic location, as I mentioned, really at the 2 ports in the south of Spain, where we have actually the lowest levelized cost of energy, which is really one of the key areas of cost for producing hydrogen, and using IoT and advanced, effectively, analytics to improve the performance of our refineries. And now, let me just, now having done this journey of what is Cepsa, now the journey of Cepsa and AWS. And we started together in 2018, and we begin in our cloud journey. AWS was selected as a preferred partner, and we're born of digital transformation. Then in 2019, we signed a strategic partnership, and in 2020, we started to increase the way that we sort of combine our expertise between the two companies and join forces and develop opportunities like cashback agreement on some of our loyalty customers, or having Amazon lockers, more than 100 in our service stations, as a way also to entrench that relationship. In 2021, we included additional businesses from LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, and also chemicals and upstream into effectively the journey to cloud that we undertook for the other businesses. And in 2022, we have actually increased the usage of AWS services when we compare it by 2019 by 60%, because we see the benefits of bringing the technology to us. And effectively now in 2023, this year we have started also to have Spain as our region for data center extension, and having also disaster recovery capabilities here at our home turf. So joining forces between the two companies has been very important for us. This is a journey that has taken us, a few years. It's really a path where we are decarbonizing, and we'll tell you at the end of the presentation, because our ambition is taking us one step forward. And maybe there, I pass it on to you, Joseph, to elaborate a little bit on some of these initiatives we have taken together.
Thank you, Carmen. Thanks for your presentation. Thanks for your timeline. So the journey that we've been on with Cepsa for the last few years, it does follow some architectural patterns that we see definitely at Cepsa and beyond. One is to focus on foundation. Right? You can't have a strong and a fast cloud adoption if you're building on a weak foundation. Cepsa very early on created a cloud center of excellence, one of their recommendations we have to our customers, and they've been adopting services like Control Tower to manage their 200 plus accounts across 6 AWS organizations. They got not only much, really fast provisioning of accounts down to 2 hours, but what's even more important is they have now the confidence that their cloud operations are secure. They have over 450 security rules that they are, by default turn on in their accounts. And that's allowed them to really free their builders. And we'll talk a little bit more about that by creating a development platform that enables them to accelerate the delivery of digital solutions. Once you have a strong foundation, then we also see customers migrating at scale. Carmen already mentioned their migration of SAP. They're one of the largest workloads to the cloud, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But beyond SAP, they have hundreds of applications running in the cloud, many of them on native services like ECS and EKS, Kubernetes Service for Containers. And they are already starting to leverage and augment their usage of the regions as we increase and bring additional regions to service, like we did last year in Spain, which is, Carmen mentioned, their home turf, as she put it. They're migrating more and more workloads. They were actually one of the first customers to run workloads. In this case, was FSx on tap for in Spain. Once you have a migration at scale, you start to have data at scale. And that's when you can have a pattern of creating standardized data lakes, getting specialty analytics in products like energy parks, that Carmen mentioned, petrochemicals, and you can really get to insights that otherwise you wouldn't be able to get. And beyond analytics, they're also working on, they've established a strong ingestion and IoT platform that allows them to consume millions of data points a day. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. And once you have all this data, then you're in a position to start putting on top of it advanced services like AI, ML, or now working with them as well on generative AI. We'll talk about that as well in a minute. Cepsa's created a machine learning platform, MLOps platform, that allows them to really accelerate the delivery of models up to 25%. Great example is what they call the Jet Dragon project, which was a model they built on SageMaker to improve yields in their operations in petrochemicals in Shanghai. And it's actually saving them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So if we move on, let's talk about the development platform. The CIO of Cepsa, Susana, had a very strong vision to bring the builders close to the business and close to where the problems are, where those products and channels need to be solved. But to do that, you have to have comfortable that you're not going to have a proliferation and a free-for-all environment where it's not secure, assets are not reused. So we created this development platform, they call it development platform, which is fundamentally a cloud-native environment for builders where they have cloud-native solutions like EKS, ECS, we talked about that, about RDS. They use our services for infrastructure as code like CDK and CloudFormation to create reusable assets that enables the builders to accelerate and redeploy assets without having to reinvent things. They manage that in a registry. They use our security services like identity and access control, like cognito pools, to make sure that folks have only access to the data they need to have access and the services, so it's a very secure and controlled environment. It's an open platform. They use the AWS API gateway and services like Athena for federated query to be able to access the data and to open the solutions they're putting in place. And all these wrapped with a layer of observability to make sure the platform is running efficiently and performing at the levels expected, with services like obviously CloudWatch, but beyond that with some of the partners that we talked about like Datadog. Here's a quote from Susana. So what's at the end of this, what comes out of it? So speed, right? We talked about earlier about the need to deliver at speed and to go through the energy transition as quickly as possible so that you can be a leader in the industry. And here's a quote from Susana from a Gartner case where she quotes like there's a 3 month, up to 3 months of a faster delivery of digital products and solutions that they accomplish through the development platform. Now, just stop for a second and think, if you could deliver all your IT projects 3 months faster, how much more you could do, right? So if we move on, let's talk about SAP for a second. So again, as I mentioned, it's one of the largest workloads. They run a bunch of operations in SAP. They run many of the back office functions like finance on SAP. And they used to run it in Madrid, in one of their data centers. They had a hot standby but it was in the same data center, so it wasn't, it really wasn't physically separated. They really struggled also, like all of our on-prem customers, with scaling up and down, especially with high memory instances like are required to run SAP. And when they had an issue, it took a long time and effort to replace that, to replace those parts. So they decided to move to the cloud. They started with bare metal instances, high memory instances, and then they quickly realized that they could actually run on a virtualized instances, because the Nitro hypervisor is offloads security, networking, storage management into its own chipset, so you can get really bare metal performance on a virtualized environment. And then they got all the benefits of the cloud, ability to scale up, scale down, the ability to provision environments. It went from months to hours and days. And then they improved, they were able to architect for resiliency, and were able to get from 98% availability of the SAP footprint to 4 nines, which is, Susanna says, that's a lot of nights of sleep that otherwise you wouldn't get. And that's where they are today. They're running, bare metal, they're running, virtualized. They take advantage of the 700 plus instance types that we offer at Amazon, at AWS. They run R5 instances for the application services. They run U and X2 instance types for their high memory database. And, they're performing well. They're moving now to the, what they're doing next is improving their availability and resiliency through taking advantage of the HANA multi-tier system replication service. So right now they're running out of Ireland with 2 instances with 2 databases, right? With synchronous replication and preload turn on. And now they are with the HANA, multi-tier system replication. They're building a 3rd tier, which is a pilot light in the Spain region, which will allow them to maybe have a little bit higher, RTO and RPO, but still very competitive at a price. And they already have 2 availability zones that gives them fundamentally a zero RPO and recovery point objective, and about a minute of recovery time objective RTO. So let's talk about for a second about their the data analytics. Carmen talked about it. I mentioned this before. A great example is the industrial data lake that they built. They wanted to get new insights. They wanted to automate their workflows. They wanted to find out whatever waste and opportunities to operate more efficiently and leaner in their energy data parks. So they built an architecture, industrial data lake, that gets data from 300,000 sensors. The data comes in through IoT Core, which is an MQTT-based ingestion platform. That data is then fed into Kinesis data firehouses, and then stored into S3 and DynamoDB for the database if required. So then this data stocking is processed into EMR for transformation and for data cataloging. And this is giving them the ability to get insights that they had never before. This is a platform that is available to their builders and developers in the business units and in IT. And then others will go in and they'll build additional services on top of it. For instance, they built for their energy data parks, their refineries, a control center that scans, that has an ability to monitor on a real-time basis with 170 million data points that they ingest a day, their operations and the status of their refineries worldwide. And I would love to talk about the benefits, but since we have Carmen here, who better than the CFO to talk about the value?
Of course. So for any of these initiatives, there needs to be a business case. We need to see that there is really an improvement, that we really get value out of, obviously, in this case, this downstream data lake. And for us, we have actually seen those KPIs materializing. So as you can see, at 2%, more than 2% of energy consumption savings, which is obviously for us very relevant. A 2.5% increase also in throughput, and we measure that. And also we have been able to predict malfunctions on complex equipment up to 45 days in advance. And these are all, some of the examples, because there needs to be a business case, there needs to be KPIs, there needs to be a delivery of value creation, through these platforms. And of course, we have also, worked on the basis of, improving the customer experience that we have in relation to our, service stations. And there is, maybe Joseph, you can elaborate because, the work is obviously taking place and is future of the IoT.
Yeah, so that's another. Thank you. It's another usage of data within a little bit different with that we're now starting to tackle with Cepsa. We're talking about data that comes from the energy parks, the refineries, and now we're pivoting to talking about exploring together a draft and a possible future IoT platform that instead takes data from their service stations. They have hundreds and thousands of service stations, and this will give them the opportunity to manage the assets in the service stations, whether it's car washes or dispensers. Understand the failure modes, failure patterns, make sure that they're responsive. But also give a better customer experience. We're looking at video feeds, a bunch of unstructured data, and we're exploring how to meet the customer, understand the customer needs better through those video feeds and the analytics behind them, and provide a different experience. So the architecture that you see here is a little bit similar, but also a little bit different from what you saw before. So one is it continues to be a very modular architecture. There's first an ingestion layer from one from MQTT devices directly into IoT core, or if you have non-MQTT devices, you can get feed through the device gateway. You can also use the API gateway or the REST absorption mechanism if you have an OEM cloud that gets data from your IoT and from the assets. And that goes into IoT core, but as you see here, you don't see Kinesis data fire hoses, and you don't see DynamoDB. What you see here is our newer services like IoT Sidewise, which allows you to collect, manage, and report on IoT real-time feeds. You see services like the IoT FleetWise and IoT TwinMaker to represent and model those assets and understand the dependencies and have a visualization of entire service station operations and create failure modes. And then IoT Sidewise, I mentioned that already, and IoT Analytics, which is fundamentally our big data and analytics service that is specifically built for time stream scenarios and use cases to perform analytics for these type of things. And then obviously we have a visualization and observability layer with Grafana, so that you can visualize the reporting and build your own visualizations and data consumption for this. And then we promised, we talked about Gen AI, another use of data here, which is really interesting. Cepsa, like in many companies in our industry, security is job zero. And here is a use case that we're actually just transitioning right now, where they use Bedrock to fundamentally improve the awareness and contextual data that an operator gets at Cepsa. So if you're an operator and you receive a work order at Cepsa today, you get a safety package, which is very complete, but it's generic, right? It's not necessarily contextualized to what you're about to do. So what we're doing now, what we build with them, is you take data from safety incidents, you take that from maintenance records, you take IoT data in terms of was there an overpressure, was there under pressure, what's going on in that situation, and all that data is then absorbed through Streamlit front end, but it goes, we have Kendra, which you may or may not know, but it's our retrieval, augmented generation, our retrieval engine, enterprise search engine, and they use Kendra to query that data. It gets retrieved and it gets passed to an Anthropic Claude model that then produces a report for the operator that is fully contextualized to say, okay, here's the task, here are the near misses that we had in this particular asset in the past. Inform yourself about that. Here's the particular condition, which is a much more effective way to maintain the safety and to give the operator the best shot to complete a safe job here. And with that, so that's what we talked about, where we've been with Cepsa, some key highlights of our journey together. But as Karen hinted before, we're not done. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and let's talk a little bit about the future of our collaboration.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. And there is a lot to do. The journey hasn't stopped here. and it continues. And actually this year, we got together in Seattle to have an executive visioning journey, which actually helped us define many opportunities and to drill down to a few that we would focus our teams to take the next step forward between the two companies. Because obviously this journey is really one of a teamwork where we can combine our expertise in the different areas and really get effectively an acceleration of the energy transition. So from those meetings, which had a lot of work behind that, we selected 4 initiatives that we would like to share with you, which we're currently developing with Joseph and the team. So on one side, Delphi, which is a measuring and forecasting of our scope 1, 2, and 3, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of emissions. It has a profound impact in facilitating really the change that the energy transition brings to us and to our customers. So it's really solutions, and how we measure emissions across the board is important, obviously for us as we have specific targets, but it is really for our customers in a broad and very sincere way. And it's effectively the access and availability of having that data for those greenhouse emissions. Decarbonization as a service. This is effectively a tailor-made platform where we are going to get the information effectively on energy cost, on equipment changes, CO2 cost, where you can really combine all the data into an app and have effectively recommendations on what are the optimal plans that us as a company, or more in particular our clients, can take. And this is from heavy industries to transport and so forth. Companies that are in our client base today that will be able to improve their performance based on all the work that we're doing today. And we also have between Amazon and our own operations in Iberia a green energy collaboration, which is important as we take also the steps forward. And we look to have a shared common view of decarbonization, including marine fuels, HVO, SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, green hydrogen, and so forth. And last but not least is an initiative on safety, because safety for us comes first. It is the paramount of everything we do. We want our people to come back home safe and have effectively, return to us every single day. So, in that ambition, AEGI is Cepsa's really industrial safety management platform, which enables us really to take, the portfolio of digital solutions and provide with awareness and HSEQ risk mitigation plans to our own employees. So to improve safety performance across the whole company and align effectively our vision to be the safest company, ideally, obviously, in the industrial area that we are in Spain and in Europe. And those are steps that we're taking, as a context for initiatives that we're going to be, bringing together. I think it's, joining forces, together we create more value. The expertise of AWS, our expertise as energy providers, but now leaders into the energy transition, bring us, to effectively develop some of these solutions that we will be able to bring not only to our own systems and to our own activities, but also to our clients. And I think, this is really to close and to thank you, but pillars of companies that have success into the future will drive into the technology and how you adopt and how agile you are to take, the next steps and the changes that are coming, but also decarbonization. Climate change is one of the biggest risks that we have for our planet. It's really, this year actually, we were just one day above the 2 Celsius degrees above pre-industrialization levels. So we're going in the opposite direction to where we are looking at the Paris Agreement to be at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we need to take action. Action, from companies like ourselves that are really looking to embrace energy transition. And it's not just corporates. We as individuals, we should leave, a better planet for our children and next generations. And with that, we conclude this presentation, and we are open for any questions that you may have.